Michael Jackson spent his entire life surrounded by noise, fans, cameras, rumors, expectations. But when the noise became unbearable, there was one person he quietly turned to. Not a manager, not a producer, not even his own family. Her name was Diana Ross. To the world, she was an icon. To Michael, she was something far more complicated. Part mother, part protector, part unreachable love. And there were things about that bond he never explained, never clarified, and never fully confessed. Because some relationships don't end. They just go silent. The first woman who made him feel safe. When Michael Jackson first met Diana Ross, he was still a child learning how to exist under a spotlight that never turned off. He was barely old enough to understand fame, yet already old enough to feel its pressure. Diana, by contrast, was fully formed, confident, celebrated, and untouchable. She had already conquered Motown, already mastered the art of control in a world that rarely offered it to women, especially black women. Their meeting didn't feel accidental to Michael. In his own telling, it felt like rescue. He later spoke as if his future had been uncertain until Diana appeared, even though the truth was more complicated. The Jackson family had already caught the attention of Motown's leadership, and Berry Gordy understood Michael's potential almost immediately. Still, the story that Diana discovered him mattered to Michael because it gave emotional meaning to a childhood that often felt transactional. What mattered wasn't who signed the contract. It was who made him feel seen. From the beginning, Diana treated Michael differently. Not like a novelty. Not like a prodigy to be displayed. She spoke to him as if he were already someone important. That distinction mattered deeply to a boy whose father measured worth in performance and perfection. Around Diana, Michael wasn't being corrected. He was being encouraged. There were moments when that encouragement crossed into something more intimate. Michael spent time in her home. He watched how she moved, how she spoke, how she controlled a room without raising her voice. She became a model for adulthood, calm, composed, admired. Over time, Michael began referring to her not just as a mentor, but as Mama. This wasn't a joke. It wasn't branding. It was emotional shorthand. In a life filled with authority figures who demanded something from him, Diana was different. She didn't need him to perform. She didn't need him to win. She simply needed him to exist in her orbit. That alone created a bond that would never loosen. When admiration turned into emotional dependence. As Michael Jackson grew older, the role Diana Ross played in his life quietly changed. What began as comfort slowly became fixation. This wasn't sudden, and it wasn't dramatic. It happened the way emotional dependence often does, so gradually that the person inside it doesn't notice until it's already permanent. Michael didn't just admire Diana. He measured himself against her. Her poise became something he studied. Her voice became something he tried to echo. Her presence became something he needed nearby, even when he couldn't explain why. For a boy who never experienced a normal emotional development, admiration didn't stay admiration for long. It evolved into identification. By the time Michael entered his teenage years, Diana was no longer just the woman who had once made him feel safe. She had become the template for who he believed he should become. Not only musically, but emotionally. Diana represented confidence without cruelty, power without rage, control without fear. Everything Michael felt his own life lacked. Those close to him noticed it. He talked about her constantly. He carried photos of them together. He teased his sisters, telling them they weren't beautiful until they looked like Diana. These weren't casual comments. They were signs of a mind attaching identity to a single figure. Michael's world was built on extremes. Love was never casual. Trust was never partial. When he attached himself to someone, he attached fully. And Diana, unlike others in his life, never pushed him away. She allowed the closeness. She encouraged it. Sometimes she even leaned into it. Their professional collaborations only intensified this bond. Appearing together on television gave Michael something he rarely felt: approval without conditions. When Diana teased him, it wasn't ridicule. When she praised him, it wasn't transactional. For Michael, that distinction mattered more than success itself. As he transitioned into his solo career, the need for Diana didn't disappear. If anything, it grew stronger. Fame didn't replace her role. It magnified it. The more powerful Michael became, the more isolated he felt. And isolation always drove him back to the one person who made him feel emotionally grounded. But admiration becomes dangerous when it goes unbalanced. Michael began expecting emotional access to Diana that no adult relationship could realistically sustain. He wanted closeness without distance, reassurance without absence, loyalty without interruption. Diana, however, had her own life, her own children, her own relationships. And those realities clashed with the fantasy Michael had quietly built: mother, lover, or something that had no name. By the time Michael Jackson reached adulthood, his relationship with Diana Ross existed in a space that had no clear definition. It wasn't purely maternal, it wasn't fully romantic, and it certainly wasn't healthy by ordinary standards. But nothing about Michael's emotional life followed ordinary rules. Michael himself struggled to explain it. At different times, he described Diana as a mother, a sister, a lover, and a best friend, sometimes all in the same breath. To outsiders, those descriptions sounded contradictory. To Michael, they felt accurate. His emotional world had never been compartmentalized. Roles overlapped, boundaries blurred. Love was not categorized, it was absorbed. There were periods when their closeness intensified beyond what most people would consider appropriate. Michael openly referred to Diana as his girlfriend. According to his brother, he became possessive, uncomfortable with other men entering her life. He talked about marriage. He imagined a future that, in his mind, felt inevitable. But reality didn't match that vision. Diana never fully stepped into the role Michael wanted her to play. She enjoyed his devotion. She accepted his admiration. But she never committed to him in a way that removed all doubt. This uncertainty became emotionally devastating for Michael because ambiguity was something he could not tolerate. He needed clarity. He needed permanence. When Diana began forming relationships with other men, Michael reacted not with anger at first, but with disbelief. He didn't understand how someone who shared such emotional intimacy with him could choose another life alongside it. He interpreted her independence not as choice, but as abandonment. Biographers later debated whether the relationship ever became sexual. Some insist it never crossed that line. Others point to moments of intimacy that suggest otherwise. What matters more than the physical truth is Michael's emotional truth. He believed the connection was real. He believed it was mutual, and he believed it was being taken away from him. That belief left scars. Michael skipped Diana's wedding. He later admitted he was jealous, openly saying that his feelings for her never faded. Even as he tried to move forward with his own life, those attempts were repeatedly disrupted by Diana's continued presence. She would reappear at key moments: award shows, public events, private crises, just enough to remind him that the bond was still alive. This push and pull dynamic became a pattern. Diana never fully left. Michael never fully let go. Their connection existed in a state of suspended resolution, where nothing ended, but nothing progressed either. Jealousy, control, and the cycle. He couldn't escape. As Michael Jackson tried to build a life beyond Diana Ross, something kept pulling him back. It wasn't nostalgia, it wasn't habit. It was the feeling that any step forward required her permission, even when she never explicitly gave or denied it. Michael made attempts to move on. He went on public dates. He allowed himself to be seen with other women. On the surface, it looked like progress. But beneath that surface, nothing had changed. Diana remained emotionally central, and every new connection existed in her shadow. When Michael appeared with other women, Diana's reactions were never subtle. She inserted herself physically, emotionally, and symbolically into moments that should have belonged to him. At award shows, she touched him, clung to him, redirected attention back to herself. She smiled, flirted, laughed, sometimes forgetting her own lines while standing beside him. To outsiders, it looked playful. To Michael, it was destabilizing. He didn't feel chosen. He felt interrupted. Michael later described this pattern in fragments, never fully accusing her, never fully defending her either. When he tried to detach, she reappeared. When he leaned in, she pulled away. The message was never consistent, but the result always was. He stayed emotionally suspended, unable to fully invest in anyone else. Jealousy became unavoidable. Michael struggled watching Diana with other men, particularly powerful or famous ones. He felt replaced, not romantically, but symbolically. To him, those men weren't just partners. They were proof that the bond he believed was sacred could be shared, diluted, or redirected. This wasn't a standard love triangle, it was an emotional hierarchy. Michael believed Diana occupied a place in his life that no one else could. When she treated that place as flexible, it shook his sense of emotional reality. At the same time, Diana never fully disengaged. She showed up when he was vulnerable. She defended him when others mocked him. She comforted him when his body began to fail under pressure. In moments of crisis, she acted not like a former lover, but like a guardian. That contradiction kept Michael emotionally bound. He didn't know whether he was being loved or managed. This confusion bled into Michael's sense of masculinity, autonomy, and control. He was one of the most powerful figures in entertainment, yet emotionally dependent on someone who never clarified her role. That imbalance created resentment, but also guilt. Because Michael didn't want to blame Diana, he wanted to protect her image, even when he was hurting. The song that said, "What he never could." When Michael Jackson released a song that sounded bitter, confrontational, and unusually exposed, most people took it at face value. They heard a story about obsession, temptation, and betrayal, and accepted the official explanation without pushing further. But for Michael, that song was never just a performance. It was a message he never delivered out loud. At the time he wrote it, Michael wasn't simply heartbroken. He was disillusioned. Years of devotion had led him to a realization he struggled to accept. The woman he had centered his emotional life around was never going to choose him in the way he needed. And worse, she seemed unwilling to let him go completely. Michael had invested everything, time, loyalty, emotional energy, even fantasy, into a relationship that existed without clear boundaries. When that illusion finally fractured, the pain didn't come out quietly. It came out sharp. He wrote the song during a period of emotional exhaustion, when admiration had curdled into resentment. He felt used, replaced, and humiliated, not because Diana chose someone else, but because she did so while still keeping him emotionally close. To Michael, that felt like betrayal without closure. Early drafts of the lyrics were reportedly far more personal. They didn't describe a faceless figure. They described a woman who moved between powerful men, who demanded devotion without offering commitment, who blurred affection with control. Those lyrics were dangerous, not legally, but emotionally. Anyone who knew Michael well would recognize the target. That's when intervention happened. Michael's producer understood what Michael himself couldn't yet see. Releasing the song in its original form would expose more than just anger. It would reveal a private emotional history Michael had spent years protecting. The suggestion was simple but strategic. Rewrite the narrative. Turn the woman into a symbol. Make her anonymous. Call it fiction. Michael agreed. outwardly. The revised version allowed him to deny intent. Publicly, he insisted the song wasn't about anyone specific. Privately, the pain never left the lyrics. If you listen closely, the anger rises and falls unevenly, as if two different emotions are fighting for control. That wasn't accidental. The beginning and end carried his truth. The middle was camouflage. Diana understood immediately. She didn't need confirmation. She knew Michael's emotional language too well. For a time, she was furious. Their communication cooled. The silence between them grew heavier than any argument. But eventually, as always, she forgave him, or at least resumed contact. She even joked about the song later, reclaiming it in her own way, as if humor could neutralize what had been said. The choice he made, when words no longer mattered. Near the end of his life, Michael Jackson stopped trying to explain his feelings. He had spent decades circling the same truth without ever naming it out loud. By then, interviews felt unsafe, clarifications felt pointless, and silence became his last form of control. But when it came time to make decisions that would speak after he was gone, Michael was unmistakably clear. In the document meant to protect what mattered most to him, his children, Michael named Diana Ross, not first, but unmistakably present. If his mother could no longer care for them, Diana was the one he trusted to step in. This was not symbolic. It was deliberate. It was intimate. And it revealed more than any confession ever could. Raising his children was the one role Michael took without performance. He spoke about it with seriousness, fear, and pride. He knew how fragile innocence could be. He knew how easily it could be damaged by power, expectation, and misunderstanding. To entrust that responsibility to Diana meant he believed she understood those dangers as deeply as he did. This decision confused the public. To Michael, it was obvious. Diana had known him before the world reshaped him. She had seen him vulnerable, uncertain, unfinished. She had protected him when he was mocked, defended him when he was attacked, and stood beside him when others quietly stepped away. Even when their relationship was painful, it never broke completely. After his death, Diana did not launch explanations or rewrite history. She grieved. She defended him when accusations resurfaced. She asked for compassion rather than spectacle, and year after year she continued to acknowledge him, not as a headline, but as a person she had lost. Michael never publicly clarified their relationship because clarification would have reduced it. Labels would have cheapened something that lived in contradiction. What mattered to him wasn't whether the world understood. What mattered was that she knew. In the end, Michael didn't leave behind a letter explaining Diana Ross. He left behind trust, and trust, when given at the most critical moment, is the truest form of truth he ever allowed himself to share. So was Diana Ross a mother, a lover, a protector, or something Michael Jackson could never fully define? Do you think his silence was fear or respect? If this story made you see their bond differently, share your thoughts below. And don't forget to subscribe for more untold chapters from Michael Jackson's life.